Good morning, everyone. My name is Jim Wood. I'm chair of Wood Communications Group, and I serve as strategic counsel to Competitive Wisconsin. The Wisconsin Tomorrow Action Accelerator series emphasis is on strengthening the ability of communities and regions to compete for workers and people in the strategic areas identified in the American Rescue Plan Act Summit we helped to convene in 2021. More specifically, we are committed to helping communities and regions recruit, attract, and retain workers and people. We believe that to do that, Wisconsin communities have to be strategically competitive in 8 related areas, including workforce recruitment and retention, early childhood care and education, broadband, healthcare, workforce transportation, workforce housing, rural resurgence, and energy. In the course of convening these action accelerators, we have had an opportunity to interact with more than 1,000 registrants and are proud of the fact that elected and appointed officials from 63 of Wisconsin's 72 counties registered for one or more of these events. We were also delighted to have had the opportunity to convene the events with such organizations as Momentum West, the Eau Claire Area Chamber of Commerce, Seven Rivers Alliance, New North, Madison Region Economic Partnership, Centergy, and the Greater Wausau Chamber of Commerce. We're equally delighted that a number of regional and local academic, corporate, and economic development organizations have co-hosted these events with us and would want at this point to also note our serious sponsors, which include the Wisconsin Counties Association, American Family Insurance, and Wood Communications Group. Our topic sponsors include the Wisconsin Realtors, Madison Gas and Electric, Rural Wisconsin Health Cooperative, the Construction Business Group, the Wisconsin Transportation Builders Association, Metastar, Mayo Clinic of Northwestern Wisconsin, Gunderson Healthcare, Dairyland Power, and Centergy. And lastly, I want to note that our reporting sponsors include WIS Business, the Wisconsin Broadcasters Association, the Wisconsin Newspapers Association, and Wisconsin Eye. On that note, let me turn the program over to Mark O'Connell. Most of you know who Mark is, but he is the president and CEO of the Wisconsin Counties Association and has been for a considerable length of time the vice chair of Competitive Wisconsin. I've had the pleasure and the honor of being Mark's friend for decades now. We have traveled the state together. If you're ever looking for a visionary and interesting conversation to have, there's nobody else better than Mark O'Connell to sit down and talk about where we are in Wisconsin. So let me turn it over to you, Mark, and we'll go from there.
Great. Thanks, Jim. Again, Mark O'Connell, Wisconsin Counties Association. On behalf of Competitive Wisconsin, I'd like to welcome everyone to this event. Competitive Wisconsin is a gathering of, I would say, thought leaders that are examining the challenges facing Wisconsin and coming up with potential solutions to position this state for future success. Everyone involved in Competitive Wisconsin, and I dare say everyone in our state that is in the arena of public policy, as all of we are, cares about the future of this state and wants us to be the best state we could possibly be. That means we need to address the challenges head on. And in Wisconsin, we've had a long history of being creative and aggressive when it comes to, the challenges of society. This is no different. We have an energy issue in this state, and we're going to talk about it today. There are solutions, but it will come from the smart people that are discussing that matter today and make recommendations to our policymakers so that we might be positioned for future success. I am very happy to introduce Jeff Mayers, our good friend and moderator extraordinaire, Mr. Wis Politics, to handle this first panel. But before I do that, we need to take care of one piece of business. We have with us today Commissioner Christy Nieto, and as such, being a commissioner on the Public Service Commission, we need to make a legal statement. During this event, we cannot discuss the merits of any case that is or will be before the commission. If the conversation begins to go in that direction, the commissioner will have to excuse herself, leave, and return once that topic is no longer being discussed. So with that, Jeff Mayers, welcome.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Jim. Thanks, Competitive Wisconsin. Thanks, everybody, for who's listening in or tuning in. Really appreciate it. I'm Jeff Maris from WisPolitics.com and WisBusiness.com. We already know that PSC Commissioner Christy Nieto is on the panel. Thank you, Christy, for being here. Christy served in a variety of roles at the PSC for more than a decade before being appointed to the commission by Governor Tony Evers on January 16. She previously was administrator of the Division of Energy Regulation and Analysis. That was just one of her posts. We also have Jeff Keeber. He's the chair, president, and CEO of Madison Gas and Electric. Welcome, Jeff. We have Teresa Mogensen. She's chair, president, and CEO of American Transmission Company. Bert Garvin, executive vice president, external affairs for WC Energy Group and a former PSC commissioner. And Tom Content. He's the executive director of the Citizens Utility Board. So I'm going to start working backwards here. I'm going to start with Tom, and with an overall question, Tom. Our panel is looking at transformational management of the changes in the generation, transmission, and demand for use of energy in the state of Wisconsin. So, what do you think is the biggest change occurring right now in the way Wisconsin energy is being generated and distributed? What's the biggest change on the agenda?
Well, I think the biggest change is the transformation from a fossil fuel fleet, largely fossil fuel and coal fleet, to a different fleet for our utilities. And the other big change is dealing with electricity demand that's on the horizon and how that affects the transition. And how we do that in a way that is analyzed to the fullest extent possible, so that we're not overbuilding and overspending, because we have had challenges with affordability, and we continue to have challenges with affordability. So it's this big balancing act between reliability and affordability that I'm sure we'll be talking a lot about.
Bert, what's your take on that? What's the biggest change facing WEC Energy Group and the landscape at large here?
Well, I think if you look at any utility across Wisconsin, we all have the same growth plan. We're all decarbonizing, investing billions of dollars, thousands of megawatts in cleaner energy resources. And the challenge we're going to have over the next 5 to 10 years is making sure we ensure reliability, because we'll talk later, but there's a lot of changes going on in terms of the value that the renewable resources we're building, that our MISO and the grid operators are giving that. So the challenge we see is, how do we do this transition and keep rates affordable and maintain reliability? That's the biggest challenge, and I look forward to talking more about that topic as we go through this discussion.
Yeah, we'll drill down on it, Bert. Okay, Teresa, what's your view on this? What's the biggest challenge out there?
Yeah, well, I think it's been hit. The number one is the energy resource transition. And from our perspective as being the transmission, we're the middle. We're needing to interconnect and move all that power and deal with the changes in the overall mix in an unprecedented way with respect to the amount of intermittent renewable resources. Then on the other side, on the distribution and customer side too, there's quite a bit of evolution. Demand, of course, with after a period of not much demand growth, we are in a period of significantly increasing demand growth. We also have resources coming in on the distribution side too, which are a new challenge for the grid to be able to integrate and manage all of these things happening on both generation and distribution or customer side. It's a very active time.
Indeed. I think we might be in one of the most really exciting times. It's most challenging, but one of the most exciting times in the energy field here, which makes this discussion very timely. Jeff Keebler of MG&E, what's your take?
So like Teresa, all of it's been said already, or most of it's been said already. It really is the transition of the generation, which has a lot of other things that have to go along with it, such as transmission. I use 4 words when I describe my role as a utility, and it's the provision of safe, reliable, affordable, and sustainable energy. Safety and reliability, we can't touch. We need to make sure that we're top tier in that, because safety is important for us, for our customers, our employees, our community, and reliability is important for all of our customers, whether you're in your home or you're running a business that relies on energy. So we can't touch those. So we need to make sure that we do this transition in a way that maintains the reliability of the grid that we have expected and that customers continue to expect. We're in a world today where if you lose power for any length of time, you lose your connection to the world. It wasn't that way 10, 15, 20 years ago. Now it is. And so reliability has to be paramount, and everything we're doing is around reliability. So when I think about it, and I think about the last two words, affordability and sustainability, that's where we have to balance. And that's what we're doing as utilities, is balancing that affordability and sustainability without jeopardizing the safe, reliable system that we have.
Okay, let's move on to PSC Commissioner Nieto.
Thanks, Jeff. Very similar to my fellow panelists here. I think it really comes down to, in Wisconsin and across our region and across the nation, there is a clean energy transition underway. And the biggest challenges during that transition is how to achieve the simultaneous objectives of reliability and affordability, like the other panelists have said. And I've heard it described as almost during this transition, you have a balloon and you have reliability and affordability, and you squeeze one side of the balloon and the other side inflates. And that's what it can feel like a little bit. There's this challenge in achieving those simultaneous objectives. But I think we also know that there are technologies and strategies that can support us achieving affordability and reliability at the same time and carrying out this transition responsibly. So I think there's a big opportunity as well.
Okay, let's stay with you, Christy, on this. What do you think is the timetable for this transition? Is it years, decades? How long will this transition take, do you think?
Certainly years. The looking out over a horizon of, say, the coming 5 to 6 years, I think is where we're seeing a lot of that increase in load coming in that others have mentioned on this panel. And that's the same horizon during which we're seeing a lot of retirements. And I think that's a really critical time frame and window for the big challenge that we're all talking about. So definitely these coming 5 to 6 years are a critical inflection point in the challenge. But I think that the transition itself will continue beyond 5 to 6 years.
Right. So, okay, now I want to go to Bert and Jeff, because, again, you guys are on the front lines of this. So the renewable push has really already started and has, galloped, I think, faster than a lot of us anticipated. So, Bert, let's just go to you. What from WC Energy's point, what's the timeline on getting to where where your group wants to be?
Well, I think you got to look at both sides of our business. We run electric utility, we run gas utilities here. And the challenge on the electric side is, I think Jeff mentioned, we're shooting to lower our CO2 by 80% by the end of the decade. So that's going to mean over the next 5 years, there's going to be a tremendous amount of construction applications at the commission to help execute those plans. So the time, to Commissioner Nieto's point, I mean, the next 5 years is how we're going to get to that 80% mark, and that's going to involve retiring a ton of more of fossil. We've retired a bunch of fossil units, but we're going to be retiring more. We're going to be building. I talked to the commission staff. The last 5 years, we've done 2 gigawatts of new renewable investment, which is huge. Well, the next 5, if you look at our growth plan, our capital plan, it's 7 gigs that we're either going to convert from coal to gas, new renewables, or acquire new renewables. So the pace on the electric side is going to be tremendous, both for us as utilities as well as working with the commission. I mean, it's a lot of work. So that's going to be over the next 5 to 7 years. I think the other side of the business is going to be far slower on the electrification part of trying to get consumers and businesses off gas. That's a real challenge for affordability and reliability. And right now, that's not cost effective in the next 5, 7, even 15 years in our opinion at WEC Energy Group. So that's a little.
Okay, Jeff, what about at MG&E? How do you view, this transition, the timing of it, and what your biggest challenges are at MG&E?
Yeah, so we're on the same pathway as Bert is at WEC. For us, you just have to move the decimal place a couple of points because we're substantially smaller than what We Energies is. But when you think about it, it is the transition of generation. It's the conversion or elimination of old fossil fuel, and it's the creation of new generation. The predominant new generation is going to be clean energy, right? Wind, solar. People throw battery technology in that, which isn't necessarily a generation source, but it is a helper to capacity that we need. So we're moving fast. We've set goals. We've set 80% carbon reduction by 2030, just like WEC Energy Group has, and net zero by 2050. I can see how we're going to get to 2030. I can't see how we're going to get to 2050 yet because we need new technology for that. So when we look at timelines, I'm going to focus primarily on the now to 2030 timeline, but there's a lot moving. The numbers that Bert used mirror what we're doing. Back in 2015, we were less than a $2 billion utility. We're spending over $1 billion in the decade starting from 2015 out, just over a decade, over $1 billion on clean energy investment alone. So when you think about that, it's a huge component of what we're doing. We have I'll say a little bit more unique challenge because of our size. So we're part of a Columbia Energy Center, which is a coal unit that is in the phases of retirement coming up in 2026. That provided a third of our energy. So when you think about that, how do we lose a third of our energy from a single source all at once? And all at once may be over a month period or a couple months or whatever. But it's how do we deploy technology? So we've thought about it in multiple phases. We started with expanding renewable generation. And we've done that. So now we're in a phase that we're going to be retiring assets. We're going to be replacing those assets with other assets, primarily clean energy. We will need some dispatchable units, and that can come in the form of natural gas or battery technology, and combinations of both. And then we can deploy additional renewable energy as well. So one of the things that we've done is we found a really good partner. In a lot of cases, we partner a lot with We Energies. The utilities in the state have a long history of partnering together. And so that helps us all collectively get to our goals. And we work closely with ATC. So I think that coordination and ability to work together is actually going to help not us as individual utilities, but us as the state achieve the goals we've set for ourselves faster.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Jeff. Okay, Teresa, now, Jeff segued to ATC. Okay, so, transmitting all this power, new kinds of power, and then meeting demand, that's where the reliability comes in through you. So, in terms of the timeline, what do you and ATC have to do to help the utilities meet their timelines?
So the timeline for transmission for big grid changes tends to be a lot longer than the timeline for generation changes. So that's really the challenge that we've got from a state perspective in tying everything together, is if we end up with significant transmission changes that are needed to accommodate the resource changes, then we could get ahead, but we may be lagging a bit behind, and then there might be changes or restrictions on how that generation can operate until the grid is built out to allow it to operate reliably. So that's probably the biggest challenge from a timing perspective. And I agree, we see all the utilities on roughly a 20-year spectrum talking about their decarbonization goals and objectives, and they're going at different rates. And we have to accommodate them all. We and with MISO working in partnership with the broader regional grid, we need to work with all of them and accommodate the utilities, the independent providers, and others. And so that changing timeline and that shifting timeline matches up with shifts in operational impacts, and then all that needs to get kind of stirred in the pot so that we can make it all work.
Is there a lot of uncertainty? You hinted a lot of uncertainty. Is there a lot of uncertainty, Teresa?
Well, there's broad objectives that are often stated, but when you get down to the grid impacts, you need specificity. You need, I'm going to have this plant here at this time. It's going to be this big. It's going to use this fuel. It's going to have these physical characteristics. If we don't have all that specificity, then it becomes harder to plan the grid to be able to accommodate that and work the sequencing out to make sure everybody can connect on time and move their power on time.
Okay, let's go to Tom, and then let's come back to what would help, bring the specificity that you mentioned. Okay, Tom, what's your view on the timeline? Is 5 to 7 years fast enough in your view? Do you worry about that? Seems like a really fast timeline to me, but is it fast enough for you? Do you worry that it's too fast?
It's an aggressive timeline, and we're worried that when you talk about multiples of gigawatts, you're talking about a lot of money. So it's billions of dollars of spending that are going to be asked. The customer is going to be asked to pay both on the transmission side and the generation side. All the while, we're seeing increased spending on the distribution side for reliability and resilience. So there are a lot of challenges coming at customers with affordability, and I think that side of the balloon that Christy mentioned on affordability is already seeing a squeeze, and I'm worried about the squeeze coming at us. I think we need actually, in my view, need to give the PSC and the commission more tools to make sure that we're making the soundest choice and the most cost-effective choice for the state.
Okay, well, just expand on that then, because we're going now to what can speed things up or help the process. Tom, what do you think the PSC? What tools do they need that they don't have?
Well, I think one tool that I think would help is just to make sure that we're looking at all the options. In other words, so much of what we look at is the supply side, which is all we've talked about so far, and we need to do more to empower the customer side of things, so that if the commission today doesn't have the tools to look at the whole picture and say, some of this needs on the hottest summer days and the coldest winter days can be met through a variety of areas like demand response or aggressive energy efficiency. And so a resource planning requirement like Senator Coles has proposed would actually do that. We'd be akin to neighboring states like Minnesota and Michigan that are able to, where the PSCs, the commissions, are actually empowered to take a more holistic view of the entire picture of the portfolios that are being proposed, instead of having to take a piecemeal approach. The piecemeal approach is what leads to overbuilding and overspending.
So have you seen evidence of overbuilding or overspending on the transition so far?
We had overbuilding earlier in the last building cycle, and I think a lot of the rate inflation that customers have experienced over the last 20 years, it was linked to overbuilding at that time, and the fact that we didn't have that holistic view going on at the Public Service Commission with resource planning.
Okay, well, let's throw it out there. What other things could be done to speed or to help? Either money from the feds, the state, local contributions of some sort, legislation. What are the things that could help all of you do your jobs better, achieve better success for the customers, et cetera?
Let me add a couple of things, then I want to just make a comment on Tom's comments. So I think one of the things that we look for in the regulatory process is predictable regulation. Consistent and predictable regulation are terms that we use all the time. And what that does is it helps us understand what the commission's viewpoint is. It helps others. So think about that as customers, interveners, investors, who else understand what the commission viewpoint is. And so when we bring things to the commission, we're bringing things that, one, we believe are in the best interest of our customers, and two, that we believe will meet the commission's requirements. And so we're consistent and predictable is there. I want to make sure from Tom's perspective, we talk about affordability and we talk about the cost of the generation. And there's no doubt that this generation is going to cost money, and we've talked about those dollars. When we propose something to the commission, and Commissioner Nieto, I am going to look at you, so if you wave me off, I'll stop talking, but I don't think I'm going to approach anywhere near where you'll get uncomfortable. But when we bring something to the commission in terms of a generation asset, we've done a lot of modeling, we've done a lot of discussion with others. We understand and believe that that's the best interest or part of the plan that will provide customers the safest, most reliable, most affordable, and most sustainable energy. So we've done that work and we understand that work. What we don't typically talk about, and we get into shorthand, and you have a bunch of experts on the panel, so we tend to talk shorthand, so call us out if we're doing that. But when we talk about increased cost, these generators are part of our least cost plan. And what that means is when you run these out for the 30 or 40-year life cycle that they're the cheapest thing that we can do. The challenge is those costs aren't evenly distributed to customers over the lifetime of that plant. And so when we look at that, we have some costs that hit at the front end of that, and then over time, those costs are levelized. So that when Tom's talking about affordability, and not to put words in your mouth, Tom, but it's the first cost that we're seeing that customers are exposed to on the front end of that, and how do we manage that? These plants are part of our least cost plan and will actually achieve lower costs for customers over the lifetime of that plant. And that's not necessarily compared to status quo. It's compared to what we're going to have to do to existing plants with maintenance, with other environmental regulations, those sorts of things. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
I think that's a great point, Jeff. And, again, we're having a conversation. So if you hear something that you want to make a note on, break in. I mean, I think this isn't so big that you can't just chime in. But anyway, before we go to Bert and Teresa on this, though, Jeff, what do you think could help the utility? Is there some money from the feds, some legislation? Is there something that would some local action? Is there something that you think would help MG&E achieve its goals faster and better?
So we're working through our goals, and there's a long answer to this, but I'm going to give you the short version. And like I said before, I think we need consistent and predictable regulation. We've had that throughout the history of Wisconsin regulation, so that's not new. We just need continuation of that. We need processes that align to timelines, right? So implementation of new processes. I call it either putting boulders in our way or removing boulders from us. And we shouldn't put boulders in the way. That doesn't mean that we don't need regulatory oversight, because we do. We're a public utility. We're transparent in what we're doing, and the commission has a role to understand and oversee that, and they have the ultimate decision on whether we go forward with projects or not. So I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about removing boulders that we can remove, whether that's timelines and I think it's how do we get to done. And Teresa talked about the challenge of building transmission. There's a lot more timelines in the way of transmission than there are from us building generation. So I think the regulation that we have today in the state is good. We need to do everything we can to keep it on a consistent timeline. And the commissioners have historically and currently are doing a really good job at that. I think there's more issues from a transmission perspective in terms of being able to build the transmission that we need. Teresa can talk about this much more than I can, but when you think about the transmission system, we're going from large generators that were in single locations that fed out to the grid. Now we have dispersed generation, and we need to make sure the grid is strong enough. So when we talk about reliability, and you hit it, Jeff, is ATC has the predominant role in the reliability of our grid. And so we need to remove obstacles from them being able to build and do things. And I'll leave it at there and let Teresa jump in and correct me or add on to that.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, the ability to plan and build the necessary transmission is this thing that takes a long time, and we want to do the right thing. We want, all the utilities want to do the right thing. We want the most efficient mix of generation and transmission and other resources to help deliver that value, that customer value that Tom is talking about, and the affordability and all that. So what we're trying to do in the transmission side is meet everybody's objectives so that we can help everyone else deliver their goals, because we move the power. We don't generate the power. We don't use the power. We move the power. So that's the key in getting congestion and other barriers to the mix, the best mix of power that is the cheapest for the consumer at any given time. That's the objective for running the grid. So when you're in a time of change and significant change, particularly on the generation side, there are a lot of ties between generation and transmission. So when you change generation, even if you're building your generation on the same site, if it's a different type of generation, it might have different impacts on the network, might require different reinforcements or upgrades. If you're closing generation at one site and adding generation at another site, that's changing where power is injected and taken out of the grid, and that changes the physics of the power flow. All that goes to say it's not always intuitive what kind of grid impact there is with making these changes on generation and load side. And so the challenge that we have then is the timing to plan all of these and to plan the transmission in collaboration with our regional providers, MISO, with our utilities that we provide service to, generators, customers, the whole mix. So timeliness is the real challenge, and being able to build enough transmission where you're not building too much, but you're building enough where you're allowing for some of this growth and change to happen, because there's uncertainty about that future, and you don't want the transmission to be limiting the larger cost savings opportunities or policy goals coming from the generation and distribution side.
Okay, so Teresa, what would help right now?
What would really help is if I could see the exact future. No,
we can't help you there. But
what exactly was going to happen? Barring knowing exactly what's going to happen, we'd like to say, what is the most reasonable plan that we can go to reinforce the large infrastructure that's needed to give everybody else options and choices. And then do that a little bit ahead, because we've got to go through a long permitting process as well as that planning process, and then we have to construct. And we have all of the dilemmas of supply chain and all the other things. And so it's a lot. It can be, for a large power line, it can be 10 years easily for that process to go from start to finish. So if we could have...
the permitting process is too unwieldy?
I think the permitting process is good. I think maybe we could streamline some parts of it, where maybe if, for example, we're doing a rebuild on an existing line, we're using an existing line, maybe we could streamline some of the permitting related to looking at alternatives and other things, because that line has already been there, it's been cited, it's been needed, and using that particular spot to create a new facility is likely the most efficient and best use of land, et cetera. So trying to do things to streamline the process would be helpful, because that gets to timing and ability to deliver quickly. The process itself is good. It's good to be evaluating things. It's good to have all of the voices in. It's good to test and validate to make sure that we're doing the best possible job we can of making the choices that best balance all the factors. So the process is good. It's timing that's always the challenge.
I haven't heard right of first refusal in the legislation that's in the legislature right now, passed by the assembly and kind of, I wouldn't say limbo, but not moving quickly necessarily in the Senate right now. What's your view on the right of first refusal bill, Teresa?
Yeah, my view is we should pass it as quickly as possible.
And how would that help? How would that help you?
Okay, that gets right to that timing question and that certainty question that Jeff raised about certainty in regulation and in situation. If we have the right of first refusal in place, it doesn't mean, get out of jail free and do whatever you want. It means the local utilities who've got the current grid and the current responsibility to provide have first, crack at any of the new investment that's needed to move things along. If you don't have that and you have, high voltage, large lines that you have to compete for and run a competitive process, that adds a minimum of a year to the timing of, figuring out who's going to build it. And then if somebody is coming in who doesn't have familiarity with the state, with the environment, with the local entities who you're working with, it's going to add a lot of time to that process of figuring out how do you build that. Time is money, time is cost, time is delay in getting the lines done that are needed to support these policy objectives of the clean energy transition and other things that require transmission to tie them all together. So absolutely, ROFR is a very positive development. I think will be positive for moving the state ahead in all these other energy objectives.
Okay, Bert, what do you have to add on what government can do or not do to help WEC meet the timeline that you talked about?
On what we need, I mean, a lot's changed in 20 years. When I was in public service last time, 20 years ago, Wisconsin had major reliability problems, not on generation reshaping. We just didn't have enough generation, and the regulatory processes were far too slow. And the legislature and the governor acted to get rid of the advanced plan. They put accelerated timelines. Now, the regulator, if you apply for a construction application, it has to be done within a year, or the regulator has to go to court to ask for an extension. That was a sea change under Governor Thompson and under Governor Doyle. I think in 2024, we at WEC Energy Group are not asking for wholesale changes. We think we've had a very constructive regulatory environment for years here. I think the worry is resources. Just because there's so many applications from small, large utilities coming through the same agency, that's going to be a challenge managing that. But I think the PSC is a very transparent place, as Jeff mentioned. When we come in, it's not like we deem things. We're regulated, so we have to show that our projects are most cost effective and they're needed. And that's the whole point of what this exercise is doing. It's compared to what? We have very old fossil units that cost a lot of money to operate, and they cost a ton of money to put additional capital in them as they age. So, our focus is on reshaping our entire fleet in this sea change of, MISO rules and everything to be cleaner and cost effective. And, that's why we talk to Tom and interveners all the time. We try to be as transparent as possible. This is what we see ourselves doing in the next 3 to 5 years. So I don't think there's a need for significant regulatory change. Others on the panel may disagree, but I think this system has worked well. Look at ATC. That was a legislative creation, and we had one of the weakest transmission systems in the country. And we went from that to now we're talking about our frustration is we've got to make sure we execute so we can interconnect these resources. That's a That's a major change over 20, 25 years.
Jump in and echo Bert's comments that consistent and predictable are the words that I've used. That's what we have experienced, what we are experiencing, and that's what I expect we continue to experience. So I don't want my earlier comments to make you believe that there's some regulatory change that we have to have, because I don't believe there is. I think it's just making sure that we're all working together on the timelines that we've set for ourselves to have things happen. And I think the resourcing that Bert brings up is a good point. The other two areas, just to broaden your question a tiny bit, not what government can do, but when we talk about affordability, we're looking at what is the ultimate cost to consumer? And in our world, a lot of times that's viewed on a per kilowatt hour basis. And so there are two things that we're also working on that commission has programs with, Tom works with, and others work with, and that's energy efficiency, using energy at the right timeline, so we don't have to build more than what's necessary, and electrification that allows us to utilize the grid in a better format more often, I'll say, is probably the easiest way to think about that, without expanding the grid substantially, and get better, lower cost per kilowatt hour. So those are two things that we are focused on, and I know all the utilities are focused on in assuring is happening so that we can bring down the overall cost to the consumer.
Okay, Christy, I haven't forgotten about you, but I'm trying to be careful about what we ask you. But, what is you come from the staff side at PSC, long career there, and now you're a commissioner. And I'm wondering how you and staff approach this entire sea change, as Bert says, and how to manage all the applications and all the changes. I mean, what's the approach? And maybe do you need more staff to handle it all?
Other panelists have made good points that I generally agree with. I think, the permitting process at the Wisconsin Public Service Commission is already fairly expeditious. It is at most a year-long process for very large projects that have a lot of opportunity for public input, hearings, testimony, the whole entire way through. So it's very intensive work that takes place on an efficient and expeditious timeline. We at the Public Service Commission, we are facing those upcoming challenges of all of the projects and all of the applications that are coming in over the coming year, 2 years, 3 years, with the same number of staff that we've always had under circumstances that were a lot less challenging and expedited as today's are. And so, yes, I think additional staff would be incredibly helpful, and that's something that we're looking at and discussing and pursuing now. We're also simultaneously looking at process efficiencies. So those might be small changes to our process, innovative type tweaks. I know Tom mentioned IRP, so integrated resource planning. I think from the staff perspective and from the commission perspective, being able to look at the need for a project within the context of the need for a tranche or batch of projects is a lot more helpful than looking at each project individually without that context. And I think it only serves to provide efficiencies then when looking at future projects. So that's something that we've discussed and have looked at, and that some utilities have discussed what would it look like to provide the commission with more of a batch of projects to look at as context at one time while reviewing individual projects. We've also looked at reviewing multiple projects within one docket and what the pros and cons of that are, and we've tested that and tried that. So there are always small process changes that we're looking at in addition to looking at how to get additional staff that help us manage our workload. But overall, the approval timelines and the permitting itself is fairly expeditious at the commission.
Yeah, just before, Christy, I want to ask you a follow-up. Teresa, when you're talking about permitting, or when I ask you about permitting, I wasn't necessarily talking about PSC. I was talking often about the local permits and the local approvals that you need. And of course, we're a litigious society, and some of these power lines, the new ones especially, are challenged in court, which lengthens the time. I mean, when we talked about permitting, your comments were regarding maybe play that out a little bit.
Yeah, I'm talking about the whole spectrum of permitting, which, includes PSCW, and I completely endorse Commissioner Nieto's perspective on how can you get more staff. We would love to help support that because we have a lot of projects lined up that need to go through the process. And again, it's a good process. It's a solid vetting, and we support a solid vetting, but the commission can only handle so many things at once. And there's not just transmission, it's all the generation and a lot of other things too. So to the extent that we can help the process that's already been refined and made as timely as possible go with as many projects as need to get through there to help the bottleneck, that's absolutely something that we would love to support and be able to help. All the other permitting processes, it depends. It's very important to us to get a certificate of need or other approval from the commission, because that then helps smooth, in many cases, many of those local processes, because it establishes the need. We want to work closely with local communities and others on our routing and siting and landowners. We're very concerned about trying to make the facilities work as best as we can with the needs of the communities and landowners. It's impossible to make everyone happy. But we try, because we want to have these facilities be placed in a way that ideally helps the communities, that helps their economic development efforts, helps other things. So we're trying to work with a lot of processes, a lot of constituents, a lot of inputs and thoughts, and do it all in a way that's timely so that we can get to the finish line to meet the generation or other needs. So it's a lot of pieces.
Right. I mean, if you build a new power line, you're crossing dozens of governmental jurisdictions, first off, let alone private landowners. So, that's a sort of a regulatory minefield in a way. The PSC is, that's a once, you can go to them and you have professional staff, and that can be relatively simple compared to some of the new power line endeavors.
The thing we've tried to do, to comment there, is to get out with the communities and others when we're in the planning stages, not when we're like right on the line. We're trying to get out there and say, hey, we're seeing a need for a facility coming through your community in the next 5 years, 10 years. Let's start talking about your permitting process, where we might want to site it, what makes the most sense. So we're trying to get ahead as much as possible while we're in the planning stages, before we're in that timeline crunch. And that then helps, again, that timing compress, because ideally we've worked some things out in advance, and then there can be more consensus on approach on routing.
Yeah, right. Jeff, a couple points I want to just follow up on. As a consumer advocate, I want to actually show you that there's consensus in the room on something here. So, which is that more resources for the commission is a real dire need. I think it's something that should be a key takeaway from this from today. I think we need to think about ways to be innovative. Maybe is there a way that salary structures can be boosted over there, because a lot of the commission has lost a lot of staff to the utilities over the years. By and large, a few come to CUB, but by and large, we lose them to lose staff to utilities. And because you asked about ROFR, I can't let that go without just mentioning that we are opposed to ROFR and part of a large coalition that's opposed to that. Competitive bidding is working in other states, and in recent months, courts in Iowa and the U.S. Supreme Court have weighed in by that these things that are unconstitutional. So we need to actually have competitive bidding going forward. It's already working in the MISO region. It's already working here. There's no need to get rid of it.
Okay, so building on that, Tom, there's been a boom in a sense of alternatives to using your local utility to generate power, right? And so I think that's created a lot of controversy because that upsets, a decades-long reliable system. What's the Cubs' view on other generation alternatives, local generation alternatives?
I mean, we support a strong regulatory structure. We've seen Illinois and other states that have deregulated and allowed, energy marketers to come in, and by and large, that's been an experience that our counterpart in Illinois, the Citizens Utility Board down there, has noted a lot of people getting taken advantage of by operators coming in and promising and not delivering. Consumer complaints are a problem. But I think there are ways that we can, be more innovative. Unlike others on this panel, we support, leasing of solar panels. We see that as an equipment lease, as a way to have more customers getting more involved in the energy transition. So if you can lease your panels, you're more likely to afford the panels. You're more likely to take part, and I think that's just one element. It doesn't have to be unlimited leasing. There could be a cap put on it, but I think there's probably a grand bargain compromise where we would allow some of this and a lot more attention on kind of the demand side, because the cheapest way to do an affordable energy future is to maximize consumers, businesses saving energy, because we're talking so much about building new projects. The old saying, if to a hammer everything looks like a nail, and for utilities, it's a lot of the focus is on build, and that's because there is a capital bias. The more they build, the more money they make. So we need to that's why better processes would help make sure that we have an energy transition that's really focused on the customer and for the customer's benefit.
Okay, I feel like one of the utilities would want to respond to that.
I'll jump in, and then I'll let Bert jump in. We are concerned about customer affordability, and we're concerned about it in many different ways. That we're not a hammer looking for a nail. We're actually trying to build in the best, most efficient way for people. We're looking. People are talking about overbuilding. We're not overbuilding. We're looking for capacity to meet the replacement of fossil fuel that's going away. And fossil fuel is going away, as Bert indicated earlier, it's going away because of the cost of ownership right now. That cost of ownership over the next 10, 20, 30 years, whatever generator you're talking about, is greater than the cost of putting in new renewable technology. And that's not because the decisions on the retiring technology was bad. It's because we have new technology that's going to make it better for all and is more environmentally friendly. So I think we're actually much more aligned than what you'll hear in public commentary on where we need to go. Now, from my perspective, we have a regulatory compact, and that regulatory compact provides a lot of different things. One of those things is consumer protection. And that's what we're really concerned about, is consumer protection when you look outside of the utility space to do generation and have others serve. We're seeing, throughout the state, we're seeing complaints come up, not necessarily to the commission, but Better Business Bureau and others, on people who are out there trying to sell panels or lease panels to individual homes. So I think the experience that we've seen in other states says that may not be the best approach. We're also fully supportive of, if someone wants to do something on their own, they should be allowed to do it on their own. However, current constructs would shift costs to others. And so from an affordability lens, I think there's a there's a discussion that needs to be had that if we're shifting cost to others and those who don't have opportunities, is that the right outcome? When we know there's a lot of things we need to do, and I put them into the 3 buckets of cleaning, generation, which we've talked a lot about today, but I think electrification and energy efficiency are 2 big buckets that we need to work on. And I agree completely with Tom. If we can have energy efficiency, which we used to define energy efficiency by saying use less. Now we define energy efficiency by saying using it at the right time. So an example of that is electrification. When we electrify transportation, if that just comes on the grid, that's good. From an energy efficiency lens, we shouldn't say don't let it on the grid. We should say let's allow for charging at the right time for the grid to bring all this together collectively. So I think we need to spend time on those 2 buckets, efficiency and electrification, and those are as important as cleaning the generation. The difference is the utility doesn't have the ability to we can support those. We can't help make decisions on those. We can bring proposals to the commission for generation. We can't tell a customer they should use their energy in this way. We can provide programs and service opportunities to do that, but we don't have that direct control over it.
Okay, Bert, anything to add?
Well, I guess to Tom's point, we do have a policy disagreement over what's loosely called community solar. And I think to Jeff's point, the reason we think the proposal in the legislature is bad policy is it doesn't promote fairness for customers that either choose not to have solar or can't afford it. Under the community solar umbrella, you're having policy proposals that say, we have over 1 million customers. If you have 3 subscribers to a community solar project, then the other 1 million customers have to financially support that. And we don't think that's fair. To Jeff's point, we have all sorts of customers in our service territories, from Green Bay down to Kenosha, that have their own generation, and we compensate them for that excess energy that they put into the market. I think the issue is always economics. And in California, Minnesota, they've been complete failures because it's well above market and it's a huge cost shift, again, to consumers that either cannot afford solar or choose not to have it. So we believe strongly that utility scale solar, if you're going to try to decarbonize your fleet, it's going to come in significant chunks of utility scale investment. That's how you're going to meet your 80% targets. But setting up these schemes that reward a few developers and then have our customers basically ensure that or finance that investment, we just don't think is fair. But that's happening all over the country. And I think Minnesota, which their experience, Xcel's, has shown how these community solar projects are 2 to 3 times over market, and you're paying for it if you're one of our, their customers. This notion that we don't have customers that have their own generation, we accommodate it rather than resist it, because we know many more customers will be able to do that. But they will need to be on our system in the days when it's not the sun's out or there's storms and such.
When I hear about someone lowering costs by doing something on their own, I think to myself, how can they do things cheaper than the utility? And the answer is they can't. All they're doing is avoiding for paying for services that the utility is providing, and other customers then have to pay for it. So think about the balancing when the sun isn't shining, or think about the reliability, or think about all the things that we do with the commission and through the regulatory compact that are not being done by those individuals, but they're getting the benefit of those. So that's why, from a customer perspective, we think it's not the right policy.
This is a great discussion. Now, I want to ask Christy. I'm not going to ask you to weigh in on a specific proposal. What I'm asking you is this all makes it much more complicated for the PSC to regulate things. All these innovations, what other states are doing, and I'm wondering whether there's some internal or external pressure on the PSC to accommodate all these innovations, or do you look at other states and say, "Whoa, let's take it slow"? What's the PSC approach on this?
The PSC can certainly and does certainly learn from other states. Learns from our MISO region and other states nationwide, and developments in other countries. I think really with everything that is going on in all these innovations, it does come down to a matter of prioritization. And so, for instance, looking at the state has an energy priorities law, and it lists out the priorities for energy resources, and the top priority listed is energy efficiency. And that's a lot of what panelists have been discussing here today, to pull a little bit on the threads that Jeff and Tom started. When you invest in energy efficiency, the cost savings by far outweigh the cost of the investment. And energy efficiency, it creates jobs in Wisconsin, good paying local jobs. Our focus on energy program that we have in the state has avoided the need to construct the equivalent of 2 large natural gas plants. It's the benefits are enormous, and it is an available resource. So for instance, the Focus on Energy program does these big potential studies that show how much energy efficiency potential is left untapped in the state. There's a lot of untapped potential left. But we have these competing policy objectives. I think to some of your questions, Jeff, about what are the policy levers, permitting, those types of things that we need to be suggesting and looking at. There are utilities that are participating in the Focus program can voluntarily do more energy efficiency than the baseline required by the Focus program, but are not required to and cannot be required to. And so what other types of incentives or mechanisms would help drive further investment in very cost beneficial energy efficiency above and beyond what the utilities are already voluntarily doing on top of Focus themselves, because there still is that untapped potential. So I think that's a top of the state statutory priority, and something we can't forget about.
Right, and it's also a federal priority. Isn't that contained in some of the federal legislation that has passed recently to push efficiency measures and provide funding for that?
It certainly is, and here at the PSC, we're launching some of those federal programs that have provided federal money for states. So the home energy efficiency programs will be coming up soon. And in addition to those, we have federally funded programs. And I think this is important for a lot of people who I see tuning in today. We have funding that local governments can apply for, and that's coming up really soon at the PSC, that community, nonprofit, and public organizations can apply for in order to help do innovative projects around solar on their buildings, or a number of different measures. So certainly a federal initiative and priority as well.
Right, and we're going to go to audience questions now. I think this is a bridge, Christy, what you just said to what is the consumer. It's like we lay a lot on the utility. Or why don't you provide this, or why don't you provide that? But what is is there a consumer role, a consumer obligation here that that could be encouraged to achieve these big goals?
Short answer in my mind is yes, there is a consumer role and obligation. It gets back to the electrification and the energy efficiency. Neither a utility, a transmission operator, or a commission can tell someone how to use energy, right? We can put programs and policy around that, but the consumer is the one who has to make the ultimate decision to buy an electric vehicle or change a process from a fossil fuel process to an electrification process. And they're the ultimate decision maker on how they use energy and when they use energy. So Christy's talking about a lot of the programs that are out there and a lot of the efforts, and those are great to do, and we need to do those. They are going to be wholly reliant on the customer deciding to do it. So when you say there's a customer role, those 2 avenues of our 3 avenues, generation being the other one, are things that the customer has to decide on their own.
I mean, as far as customer obligation, I think the incentives are in place. The incentives are coming through whether it's the Inflation Reduction Act or others, to do more efficiency, to change out to do more insulation and air sealing, to convert to heat pumps if you want, to add solar. But I think, as to Christy's point, I think if Focus has already been able to prevent this power of our good, strong efficiency program that we have in the state has been able to prevent the need for new generation, new natural gas plants, the potential studies show we could do more. And so whether it's a regulatory change or legislative change or just incentives for the utilities, we should be incentivizing energy efficiency so we can maximize efficiency in order to so that when we're not building for an energy demand that's way up here when it could be right here.
Okay, let's go to some audience questions. And there's a real thoughtful one here, and I encourage others to weigh in. So here's the question. I'm going to read it, most of it here, because I think, as I said, I think it's a thoughtful question. How do you avoid overbuilding while at the same time requiring new technologies for climate/political reasons? Much of the current decarbonized generation is arguably overbuilding from a capacity standpoint, but it is being encouraged or mandated because of pressure to move away from the last round of carbon-based capacity build-outs that were done for reliability reasons. Here's the sports analogy. We're like the Bucks, who are paying for 3 head coaches at the same time because we keep changing our mind on who the best coach would be. The utilities, and by extension, the customers, are now paying for multiple rounds of generation because we changed our mind. Okay, that's not so much a question as a thoughtful commentary.
It's this issue of we do have old coal that's being shut down. We do have some newer coal that's being transitioned away from too. So that's kind of the point that's being made here. So I think the challenge is we're at this crunch time of the energy transition where we're paying for the new stuff as well as for a lot of investment that has not been paid off on the old stuff. If a private non-regulated, if a non-monopoly private sector company makes a bet on a plant and nothing happens, they have to write it off. If we make a bet on something that turns out to not work, the customers are still paying the bills. And that's the whole issue of stranded costs and how reducing the costs for customers when the coal plants shut down, whether that's through securitization or other moves, which is a refinancing. There are ways to bring down the costs for the plants that are being shut down, because the utilities are certainly going to be benefiting and customers are going to be paying from the new generation that's coming.
So Tom, can I just pick on your word?
Sure.
So you make a bet. So a lot of the generation that's being shut down was built in the 60s and 70s. So is that a bet in your mind that it didn't actually work the way people thought it would work?
No, that's why I distinguish between older generation and newer. When I started talking about older coal versus relatively recent coal, we have coal plants that were built a long time ago. We have coal plants that were built in the last 15 years.
Right, and they're going to continue to operate just under a different fuel source. So I think one of the challenges is in a lot of the public discussion on this whole transition, we want our cake and want to be able to eat it too, right? We want to be able to talk about moving away from the regulatory compact, but also having the regulatory compact and having Tom said if you're a non-monopoly, you're going to eat the cost of that. That is true, but there's a lot of things that non-monopolies do that we don't do, right? So they can choose to serve customers or not serve customers. We don't do that. They can choose to invest in new assets to meet the maximum need that customers are going to have, right? They have that choice. So if I want a seat at a restaurant and it's full that night, I don't get served. Right. And that's perfectly fine. That's a competitive marketplace. We don't have that option or obligation. So I think we need to be careful in the overall discussion. And this isn't just about Tom, but in the overall discussion about understanding what the whole context is. And most of the disagreement that you see is when people don't understand what that whole context is. From a regulated utility perspective, we're here to serve the public, and we do serve the public, and we have obligations put on us. Willingly, we're accepting those as a regulated utility to make sure that we're serving all of the public in the way that they need to be served. And we have process and regulatory schemes in place to be able to do that. The comparison between us and others who don't have those is not a fair comparison, because we do a lot of things that are done for the benefit of all customers. That we go through regulatory processes that approve that. So everyone had their voice when decisions were made, and now to look back and put the owner if there was a decision that, in Tom's words, the bet didn't work out, I don't think it's a bet, but if there was a decision to move away from something we've done previously, that first decision was approved and it was discussed and vetted by everyone who wanted to participate. So I just think we need to make sure we're thinking about context when we're making comments.
Certainly, technology is galloping faster and faster every year, right? And so sometimes decisions made even 5 years ago seem incredibly outdated, right? Just because technology is moving so fast or trends are moving so fast. Anyway, go ahead, Bert. Sorry.
Well, I guess I hate to play lawyer, but on the overbuild, just narrowly, that we're regulated. If we're overbuilding, all the generation models that are pretty transparent will show we're not needed, and we're not going to get approval from the commission from that. So there is a safety net there on the overbuild scenario that the question poses. But I think what we're trying to do now is transition is get the right resources to meet our need, and that's why solar facilities are wonderful energy machines in the summer. I mean, for our fleet, they're going to end up being a baseload resource during the day. But you also have to have, I like what Xcel's using, always on units, which are gas. And that's what we're doing during this transition. We're trying to right size the fleet with these no O&M or very low O&M solar facilities that work tremendously well in the summer, not as well in the winter. And that's why we need to have, and we're proposing more, at the industry across not just Wisconsin, Upper Midwest, more gas units, because at the 8 o'clock we're all trying to solve for the 8 o'clock at night problem. When you have this wonderful fleet, the sun goes down and you need to actually maintain reliability. You're going to need, and since you can't build coal and nuclear takes forever, you're going to see a lot more, whether, we built these smaller RICE units, CTs. That's going to be the future for Wisconsin and other states during this transition. And that's why I wouldn't say we're overbuilding.
Bert, define those. Define what those are, though.
Define the gas resources?
The units.
RICE is reciprocating internal combustion engine and CT is combustion turbine. Is that what you're asking for, Jeff?
Yeah. Define that.
Yeah. Well, they're small units that, we have them up in the UP and up in the Wausau area, and they work wonderfully during peak conditions. But with the new environmental regulations coming down, I think they're going to come down in April, you're going to see the industry respond to that, if we think it plays out the way, by building a whole bunch of combustion turbines, RICE units, which are the quick start, units that, will be used 10%, 20% out of the year. They're not like what you see, the combined cycle units we have, whether at Riverside, where we're a partner, in other parts of the state where they run, significantly more than that. So the gas units are going to be used for different purposes, some for peaking, some for off peak. And that's just how we manage our fleet as we integrate these solar and wind facilities. Because again, great energy machines, not great on the capacity, particularly in the winter months. And as we go to a winter peak, at least for our system, that's what we're worried about.
Yeah, just add to that. I mean, the question is really kind of the very definition of a transition, right? Because we can't take something and just stop doing that and then have the other thing. We're in a transition. So that's part of the challenge when we're working with a new mix of technologies, because we do have an obligation to meet the load at all times. We're having to figure out how to do the mix, how to handle the mix. And so what Bert was talking about, we need responsive generation units or load that can be responsive to deal with the ups and downs of intermittent power where you can't control the fuel. And renewables, excellent for energy, challenging for capacity. So that's the big question now, is what's the right capacity that you're shooting for that is going to make sure you will have energy at all the hours of the day, and that the grid that you've got will be able to take whatever those sources of energy are and mix them in a way that will make sure you don't run out. we haven't now said that it's acceptable to run out. The mixes and all the things we're talking about, we still want 24/7, 365, and that's our responsibility as utilities to be working with the regulators and others to say, how do we do that, and how do we do that in a transition where things are very different going forward than they have been in the past.
Okay, so we're about to close it out here. Does anybody have any closing remarks or things that I didn't ask or that's been bugging you about the conversation that need to be said?
I'll put a period and just on to return to. I take Jeff's point fully that the regulated monopoly is responsible for a ton of things, and is different from the private sector entity. So the issue isn't whether the people are going to pay for the coal plants that they're being shut down. It's the issue is how much should utilities keep earning a return after those coal plants shut down, and that's our issue. But I also wanted to highlight something else Jeff said, which was that one of the key things that as we think about how energy is used, he talked about when it's being used is so critical, and it matters. And so that's why at CUB we've supported MGE and the WEC utilities when they've come in to do managed charging for EVs, or in the case of MGE, they have a program that MGE Connect that gives people incentives to if the utility can control their air conditioner on the when the summer weather hits and the system is peaking. These are the kind of innovations that we need to be thinking about across the utility sector. These are small programs now. They need to be expanded, and they need to be expanded from the small utilities to the big utilities.
And just a quick comment on that. Thank you, Tom, for that. And when we think about efficiency and when the right time to use it, Tom mentioned our MGE Connect program, which we think is really successful and helps lower the usage during those peak hours. As we develop more solar and as we may get to a point where we have more than sufficient energy on those hot summer days, and so when the air conditioners are on, and so that program may not actually provide the same reduction in use that is necessary today. So we're developing other programs like water heater programs that we may be able to use during off-peak time frames to help reduce electric use for electric water heaters, which we have a challenge because not most water heaters are not electric at this point. But when we think about efficiency, my point is, as we see the generation mix change, we're going to see differences in when each type of generation is online, and our energy efficiency mix needs to change along with that so that we can shape the load at the appropriate time.
No, this is a complicated issue. I really, really appreciate the comments and really the insight. I learned a lot from this, and I think our audience did too. And so I really appreciate it. Thank you, Christy. Thank you, Bert. Thank you, Teresa, Tom, and Jeff.